Prologue. 20 minutes northwest of Augusta, Georgia, in a suburb where you're more likely to see someone praying in public than using their magic, Liv Honeycutt was trying to sell her diamond cross necklace at the King of Pawns pawn shop on Highway 104. She needed $150, $30 to cover the car to Augusta, and the rest to cover the bus ticket to New York. The $10 bill already in her purse would have to be enough for 3 meals during the 12-hour trip, maybe a Chick-fil-A sandwich for lunch and the side of waffle fries for dinner. But the guy working today did not want to give her $150. The guy working today was sure Liv's cross necklace was fake. "They're plastic," he said, pointing at the gemstone inlays with his ballpoint pen. "Or glass, maybe. Cubic zirconia at best. They're definitely not diamonds." "How can you tell?" "It's like a special ability I have." "You mean, like magic?" "Yes, like magic. Not magic, I reckon, but like it." Liv let out a sigh. She'd gotten excited for a moment there, at the prospect of a rare power. Any real power at all was rare in this part of Georgia. People with real power never stuck around here. "My mom gave me this necklace for my 16th birthday, Liv said. "Isn't there some test or machine you can use to be sure?" The cowbell over the door clunked behind her, heralding the arrival of a new customer. The guy working the counter took a look over Liv's shoulder, his impatience to be rid of her already clear on his face. "Listen, sweetheart, you can take this little necklace to Bob's Pawn or Mike's place, and I guarantee neither of them is going to give you more than $20 for it. We can't resell sentimental value at a pawn shop. Do you understand what I'm saying? That watch now, that looks like it might be worth something. If you're that desperate for money, I mean." Liv felt her heart drop into her stomach. She'd almost forgotten she was wearing the watch at all, because she wore it every day, always putting it on while she brushed her teeth. And if it was all too easy to believe that the cross necklace, like everything else her mom had ever given her, was worthless, well, it wasn't surprising that her grandmother's watch would be worth quite a lot. She put her hand over the watch, as if to shield it from this man's gaze. The new customer walked up to the counter beside her, and out of the corner of her eye, Liv could see that he was a young man, probably here to buy a gun or something. The guy at the counter turned to give the man his full attention. "How much?" Liv said. The guy at the counter paused. He stared at Liv's hand, like he could still see the watch underneath it, no doubt tapping into his ability, like magic, but not. "100 even." "But I need 150. She was about to cry. She knew she was about to cry. She could hear it in her voice, and she hated that. This man didn't seem like the type to take pity on someone in need. She'd have better results if she bargained from a place of strength. But these past few days, the fights with her parents, the reaching out to friends who'd all taken her parents' side, everyone turning their backs on her after 17 years, well, she didn't really have any strength to draw on at the moment. Some days Liv thought she was on track to have real power, if she worked at it. Today did not feel like one of those days. 120. Take it or leave it." $120. That was the value of the only thing she had left to remember her grandmother. Her grandmother, Emily, who used to read her palm and her tarot, and who used to tell her that her magic was as clear on her face as sunshine. $110, plus the 20 in her pocket. If she walked to Augusta, she could get the bus ticket and still have money left for food. "Fine," she said, undoing the metal clasp. She set the watch on the counter, while the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a large wad of bills. He flipped through them until he found a $100 bill and a $20 bill, and he handed them over to Liv like he was giving her a real gift. She took the money and ran, the clunk of the cowbell the last indignity of the encounter, though that wasn't quite true, was it? As she walked along the side of Highway 104, the sun beating down on her face, hot and miserable, she realized she was suffering the indignity more with every step. She pulled out her phone, hoping at least that Uncle Theo had responded to her friendivist message by now. If anyone would understand the soul-crushing ordeal that had been her week, it'd be him. She was counting on that. But no response. She tried to steady her breathing. She was still okay. As long as he responded before she got to New York, or before her parents realized they had the power to stop paying for her phone, since they'd said she was quote-unquote dead to them, then everything would work out. Even if he didn't respond, surely she'd be able to find some way to track down his address once she got to New York. Or maybe she'd start sending friendivist messages to his New York friends if she hadn't heard back by the bus ride. She was walking a few feet off the shoulder of the road, hardly paying attention to the cars that sped by. Even when she heard the crunch of gravel just ahead of her, she barely looked up. She didn't care why this silver Honda was pulling over. She just wanted to get to the bus stop and get the hell out of this state. "Hello there." It was the customer from King of Pawns, leaning out of the passenger side window. Now that she got a good look at him, Liv realized that he was more of a boy than a man. He couldn't be that much older than she was, in fact. He had a military buzz cut and a thick neck, but there was something about his smile that seemed genuinely friendly. Liv had been catcalled plenty of times before. This guy was at least smart enough not to lead with a come on. She still didn't trust him. "Hello," she said, but she didn't stop walking. "I know it's none of my business," the guy called to her, retreating back, "but I think I have something that will cheer you up." There it was. "Let me guess. It's in your pants." "What? Oh, but no. Actually, it's in my hand. It tells the time, and it has a little engraving on the back of it that makes me think it's something special." That got her attention. Liv turned around. Her eyes narrowed. And when she saw her grandmother's watch in his hand, dangling out the window, her first reaction, even before suspicion, was rage. "What are you doing with that?" she snapped. "Whoa, hey, I was just trying to bring it to you. I didn't like the way that guy was taking advantage of you, especially since he tried to cheat me the same way after you left." "Well, aren't you a knight in shining armor?" she said. But her voice lost a little bit of its edge. If this wasn't a trick, it was the first nice thing anyone had done for her in a very long time. She walked back to the car. He held out the watch to her, and she accepted it gratefully, not taking its familiar weight for granted as she tightened the band across her wrist. "How did you get this?" In answer, the boy weaved his hands together, then pulled them apart. A tiny light seemed to be flickering to life between his palms, but just as Liv squinted to get a better look at it, a bright flash in her peripheral vision caught her attention and made her spin. When she realized there was nothing there, and when her heartbeat slowed, Liv turned back to the boy. "Like that," he said. "Well, damn. I mean, thank you. Where are you headed, anyway? Can we give you a ride?" For the first time, Liv peered past him into the car. An older woman, maybe his mom, was sitting behind the wheel. She was watching their interaction with a kind of bland curiosity, but she hadn't spoken, and she didn't speak now. She did smile, though, like it was fine by her if Liv took them up on the ride. And Liv really wanted to. Her shirt was sticking to the sweat on her back, and her legs were sore from all the walking she'd already done this morning. "Are you sure? I'm going to the Greyhound station in downtown Augusta. I wouldn't want to trouble you." "No trouble at all," the boy said. "We were going to head that way on an errand anyhow." "Okay then," Liv said. Her hand hesitated on the handle of the back door, but only for a second. "I'm Isaac, by the way," the boy said as Liv took a seat and the car got moving. "And that's Grace." Okay, so probably not his mom, then. "Nice to meet you," Liv said. Grace only nodded. "It's not often I meet other magickers in real life who would or could do what you just did." Everybody I know thinks magic is the devil's work." "Is that right?" Isaac said. "Well, now you've met two. Grace and I live in a kind of co-op situation with a few more, as a matter of fact." He paused, considering her. "I take it when you say other magickers, you mean you can do some spell work of your own?" "That's right," Liv said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice, in spite of everything. "But my parents, well, they're basically the mascots of the people who think it's the devil's domain. My mom barged into my room a couple nights ago when I was trying to do this spell to make my eyes green instead of brown. One look at the mess of candles and whatever was happening with my eyes, and she started screaming her head off. Yesterday, my parents told me to leave and never come back. So now I'm headed to New York to live with my uncle. They disowned him, too, when they found out he was gay." It felt really good to say all of this out loud. She'd been feeling a little unhinged, keeping it to herself. Like it was some awful nightmare she'd had and not her new reality. "Wow, that really sucks," Isaac said. "I'm sorry. We got a couple people at our place who don't talk to their parents anymore either. Actually, one of them just ran off. We're hoping it's to live with an uncle type, maybe, but we're not really sure. He didn't leave a note or anything. That's why we had to sell a few things at King's. We've got to come up with his rent for the month, living in a co-op. I just hope he's okay." Grace shot Isaac an inscrutable look. Maybe she wasn't feeling quite so sympathetic to this boy who was costing them on the rent. Liv felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. It was a friendivist notification. Uncle Theo had responded. With shaking hands, she opened the message and read it as fast as she could. "And I sympathize, Liv, I truly do. But I live in a studio apartment with my boyfriend, and really it's more his place because I'm between jobs, and his couch is so small you'd have to sleep in a sleeping bag, and we could put you up for a few days, maybe a week, but no way could it be permanent, and New York is so expensive, I don't see how you would—" "How much is the rent?" Liv said. "On the room that guy left, I mean." "Why, you want to live there?" Isaac said, laughing. But then, when Liv didn't laugh, he added, "It's $300 a month." "And it's here in Evans?" Liv said. Ready as she was to start over far away from her parents, she hadn't been thrilled with the idea of dropping out before graduating. And now, if she could find a job, maybe at Starbucks or something, she could complete senior year and leave Georgia on her own terms, the way she'd always planned. And better than she'd planned. She'd be spending the year until then living with other practicing magickers. Maybe they'd teach Liv what they knew. "It's pretty close. Only a couple minutes outside of town." "I don't have a job yet, but I can get one." "We were planning to pay this month's rent anyway. You think you could have $300 by next month?" "Easy," Liv said. Grace shot Isaac another pointed look. "I am 18, Liv said, interpreting Grace's hesitance as misgiving. But Isaac just grinned. "Well then, Liv, forget the Greyhound station. Why don't we take you to see the place? See how you like the others? Fair warning, they're not as cool and personable as me and Grace, but they're all right." "Understood," Liv said, laughing. Laughing? She hadn't laughed in days. But this sudden reversal of fortune was so unbelievably perfect, so exactly what she needed, that it felt like some kind of divine intervention. And the irony of that revelation was just too much. Laughter was the only reasonable response. It would be a few months before she would look back on this moment and recognize it in a different light. Not divine at all, but a result of very human magic, self-serving, deceitful. By then, she would know that not personable was a gross understatement for describing the others. By then, she would wonder if maybe her parents had had a point, thinking magic was of the devil. By then, of course, it would be too late. Chapter 1. The spell wasn't working, no matter how many times Sam tried. Surely that meant he was doing it wrong. The incantation was tricky enough. 2 whole pages of words that looked like gibberish, but turned out to be Welsh, which was basically gibberish except harder to pronounce. But Sam had spent all summer practicing those words, transcribing them phonetically, then reciting them in his room, over and over until he'd almost memorized them. Since he still hadn't gotten the spell to work, he could only assume it was the short first step, the association he was managing to screw up. Make of your mind an empty vessel. Let it sing with silence, leaving space for your dreams. Which, sure thing, spellbook. Let me get right on that. That was often the case with high-level spells, though. That they required feats of figurative language, metaphorical thinking. Associations, if you wanted to get technical. But James often called them the touchy-feely parts. Sam wished he wouldn't. As a redhead with pale white skin, Sam was prone to blushing. Anyway, it was somehow the last night of summer, and Sam still hadn't mastered this high-level spell, despite all his efforts. It had been his one and only goal for the past 3 months. The single item on his to-do list, besides sleeping in and hanging out. This didn't bode well for the goals he'd set for senior year. "Trying again?" Sam's mom said from his doorway. Sam sat cross-legged in the middle of his bedroom floor. In front of him were the Celtic spellbook, overdue from the library and open to the page where his transcription lay next to the original entry, and a stick of sandalwood incense, burning down slowly. "Apparently, I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm starting to think I should have spent my summer on something simpler, like time travel or mind control. You do love a challenge. Which reminds me, have you talked to James since we got back?" 3 days ago, Sam and his parents had returned from a week-long vacation in Gulf Shores. He had begged to stay home and miss the trip entirely so that he could go to Mike's party with James. But his mom had pointed out that this was likely their last family vacation while Sam was a high schooler, whereas he and James had many more parties ahead of them, if not this year, then when they got to college. Roommates at UGA. That was the plan. Or at least, for 2 years, that had been the plan. And Sam was pretty sure that it was still the plan. He just felt a little unsure about where things stood with James after that awkward whatever it was at the bowling alley 3 weeks ago. And James had been so busy, between helping his dad with his roofing business and volunteering at his church's vacation Bible school. They hadn't really had a good moment, or any moment, to hang out in person and clear the air. Mike's party could have been the exact moment they needed. Sam may or may not have sulked for the first few days of the vacation, before the Gulf breeze got the better of him. "You're hilarious, Mom." "Who said I was kidding?" Well, the answer is no. I haven't heard from James since we left, and he hasn't posted any V-clips in the last week either. For all I know, he's been abducted by aliens, and I'll never see him again. Sam's mom frowned. She was a real estate agent with surprisingly sharp empath abilities, which she called her secret weapon. She could always spot the difference between a joke and a desperation vehicle. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You know, this is why I think you should just talk to him directly one of these days. Get all your feelings out in the open." "I do know that's what you think," Sam said. His mom always made it sound so easy, like it was one more negotiation with a compromise at the end that would work out for all involved parties. As Sam had tried to explain to her numerous times over the years, there was nothing to negotiate. He was perfectly happy with his friendship with James as it was. Or as it had been. As it would be again. The funny thing was, Sam hadn't even told her about what had happened at the bowling alley. She just had a sense for these things. Again, an empath. And sure, James had the exact sleepy eyes, messy hair, and slantwise smile that his mom had, correctly identified as Sam's type, based on his favorite movies. And yes, there had been times when Sam had found himself daydreaming vaguely about cooking a nice meal with a guy who could make him laugh and believed in him unequivocally, the way James could and did. But no, that did not mean that Sam was so desperately in love with James as to sabotage one of his few close friendships. Besides, if there ever was going to be some great romance between them, it was still in the ember phase now. And if Sam blew too hard, he would only blow it out before it had a chance to get going. His mom always countered that his relationship with James was less like a fire and more like Schrodinger's cat, and Sam was just afraid to open the box to find out whether it was alive or dead. "Well, suit yourself," his mom said now. "The real reason I stopped by is that your dad and I both have to be at work on the early side tomorrow. Are you going to be okay to wake yourself up on the first day of school?" "As long as I can actually fall asleep, yeah." "Right. Cherish those butterflies. It's your last year to get them." "Why? You don't think I'll get into UGA?" "It's different in college. In college, all the days run together, and your first class of the week starts at noon, if you even remember to go." "Wow. Suddenly I see why you put so much effort into keeping me away from parties. You were the biggest partier of all." "Good night, sweetheart." "Night, Mom." She shut the door behind her, and Sam started back at the beginning of the incantation, determined to give it one last try before school kicked into gear and everything got in the way. Not 3 words in, his phone buzzed on his desk. Sam scrambled over to it, but even before he got there, he had this feeling that it wasn't going to be a message from James. It was the next best thing, though. A message from Delia. "You still awake?" "You know it," he replied. "What's up?" "Is it weird that I'm nervous for the first day of school?" Sam smiled. He could just picture her chin-length, brown hair falling to either side of her face as she held up her wrist to her mouth, gnawing on the magically reinforced friendship bracelet he'd made her freshman year. She hadn't taken it off since. "Not weird," he said. "I'm nervous, and I'm not trying to get into Pinnacle." Winky face. "Thanks. Now I'm even more nervous." It hardly mattered that Sam had known her his whole life. It was still hard to read Delia's tone in text form. In stark contrast to Sam, she never used emojis, even to denote sarcasm, because she wanted her words to speak for themselves. In this case, Sam suspected she was a little bit sarcastic, but mostly serious. She really had been working herself ragged these past few years, her heart set on getting as far away from Georgia for college as she could, even though her parents had made it clear that she would have to pay her own way if she was going to pass up the Hope Scholarship covering in-state tuition. If anybody could make it happen, Delia could. It was their guidance counselor, Miss Barry, who had suggested in passing that Delia might even have what it takes to be a keeper one day, and that the Pinnacle School of Magic could help her get there. Their program was generally considered to be the best in the world, because it was free to all accepted students, while being rigorous enough to open the door to pretty much any career for its graduates. Delia had once quoted to him and James this unbelievable statistic about how something like 70% of keepers, like all keepers around the entire world, had gone through the Pinnacle program. No surprise, then, that it was mind-numbingly competitive to get in. "I'm excited for the Fascinators tryout," winky face, Sam said, changing the subject. "I hope I make the cut," Delia wrote. Good. She was back to joking. Delia, James, and Sam were the president, vice president, and treasurer/secretary of their high school's magic club, respectively. They were also the only 3 members, and had been since their freshman year. That inaugural year, in the weeks before their first Georgia State Magic Convention, when it was starting to sink in that they had no chance in hell of placing, let alone winning, James had encountered the word fascinator in a book. The word, it turned out, was not only a type of British hat, but also an archaic synonym for magicker. To fascinate was to charm, enchant, beguile. Instantly, James had seen the potential for a much-needed in-joke and point of pride for their club. With only 3 members, they might never put up a good overall finish at convention. That podium would be dominated by the bougie Atlanta schools that had dozens of members and dedicated magic classes, not just extracurriculars. But sure enough, when the announcers that year were forced to read out James's and Delia's names for top 5 freshman finishes in their individual events, and in both cases said, of the Friedman High School Fascinators, the 3 of them and their sponsor, again Miss Barry, had screamed loud enough that everyone in the giant auditorium had looked at them like they were insane. Their club had officially been called the Fascinators ever since. "Did you print the flyers?" Delia wrote. Ah, the flyers. Sam's favorite to do every year. Not even kidding. "One for every building." "Cool. Thanks, Sam." The conversation might have ended there. The reminder about the flyers was clearly the real reason Delia had messaged him. Sam's memory for details was 2 slices shy of a pizza. But since he had her... "Have you talked to James lately?" "Not since the bowling alley." For a second, Sam thought this was a pointed comment, that she'd somehow heard about what had happened outside, maybe talked to Bethany, or even James himself. This was another case when an emoji would have been extremely helpful. A winky face to mean that she'd heard all about it, no thanks to Sam, or a scratching chin face to mean that she truly hadn't talked to James in 3 weeks. Why do you ask? Sam was sorely tempted to come right out and ask her what she knew. Though that would make it a little harder to pretend that it hadn't been a big deal, which he was determined to do, so everything could go back to normal. Mercifully, before he could give himself an aneurysm from this knot of indecision, Delia moved on. "Did you get your dream spell to work?" she said. "No." Frowny face. "Well, it would have been remarkable if you had. That spell seemed hard as shit." "It really is. Like Welsh." "Welsh? Okay, I'm going to sleep. See you tomorrow, Sam." "Night." She didn't know. Sam exhaled. He went back to where his book lay open on the floor. He tried to make of his mind a vessel, and then he recited the Welsh. Then he attempted to go to sleep, crossing his fingers that the spell had worked this time, that when he dreamed tonight, as he assumed he would be present and aware, able to think and see and remember. That last part, to Sam, was the most important. Sam hadn't been able to remember any of his dreams. Not one. Not ever. As if an out gay magicker in Friedman, Georgia needed any other reason to feel weird. It hardly mattered the next day that the spell still hadn't worked. As he pulled into the senior parking lot at Friedman High, Sam felt a tiny but very real spark of hope that this year was going to be different, that it would be the year when everything went his way. It was such a small thing. The senior parking lot was maybe 20 yards closer to the school than the general parking lot was. But Sam didn't need for his life to be drastically different. 20 yards difference felt like enough. Sam had gotten to school early to put up the flyers. He pinned one to the bulletin board in each of the main halls, which, at Friedman, were divided by subject: English, science, math, etc. Sam's first period class this year was economics, so he saved the last flyer for the social sciences hall. The morning went by in a blur of new teachers and new textbooks, plus all the same classmates Sam had known his whole life. He didn't have a single class with Delia or James this semester because he was a B- human being while they were in advanced or AP everything, but the 3 of them had the same lunch period. and Sam could actually feel his heartbeat speeding up as he entered the noisy linoleum expanse of the cafeteria. James and Delia were already